I'm Kurt Loder with MTV News. Connoisseurs of video games, computer effluvia, and all the latest in electronic gizmo mania converged on Los Angeles last week. Juliet Honan scouted the wares, accompanied by a 17-year-old electro expert who helped her sort the cool stuff out from the hype. Here's her report.
This thing is now using a phone line to dial up another player somewhere out in the U.S. that we can play. And he should ideally be suited to my level of challenge.
The Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo aren't consoles that are normally brought up when discussing online gaming, but they should be, because years before SegaNet, Xbox Live, or the PlayStation Network came to be, high-quality online gaming arrived to the 16-bit era, when Catapult Entertainment released XBAND for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo.
With XBAND, the new game modem and video game network that blasts players into a whole new dimension of gaming. Created by Catapult Entertainment and distributed by THQ, XBAND is the only networked gaming product designed to support existing and future multiplayer games for both the Sega and Nintendo 16-bit game platform.
Featuring skill-based matchmaking, gamer profiles, avatars, email, nationwide leaderboards, and more, XBAND was more than just a way to play 16-bit games against opponents from across the country. It was a revolutionary product whose high-quality, low-latency, head-to-head gaming and social features were nothing short of a glimpse into gaming's future.
I mean, it was the coolest thing ever. It was my first email, it was my first chat, first online gaming.
I take this to my dad and I said, Dad, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, look at this. I can play with people across the country. We don't even have to go to the arcade anymore.
XBAND received glowing reviews from magazines and users alike. It was affordable, with the modem selling at just $19.99 and its services starting at a mere $4.95 a month. And most importantly, it worked. So what happened to XBAND, and why wasn't it a bigger success? Today, we're going to look at how a group of pioneers created something that at the time seemed unattainable.
And the mission was like impossible. How are you going to build hardware, software? There was no internet. We're building an online service.
You know, the idea that you could take a cartridge that had been released years ago, plug it in, and play it over the network with somebody else, when the original developer for that game had never even thought about network play, was mind-blowing.
And they're basically just looking at the memory concepts of these games and then inferring how to add networking after the fact. I mean, it's just crazy.
We started in April. We had to be done in the very latest October to build the hardware and to get it on store shelf. I mean, it's complete insanity. Like, who would ever sign up for that?
We were working basically 24 hours a day.
Let's see. There were so many times where we were like, okay, this is never going to work.
From overcoming technological hurdles, a partnership with Blockbuster and Viacom, its short life, death, and the new generation of hackers and developers who are on the brink of once again doing the impossible, using XBAND modems to connect real Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo consoles to each other over modern internet connections today.
I just want to give the people who want XBAND back that feeling and show them it's here again. You can re-experience everything that you loved and hated about it in 1993 and 1994.
This is the story of XBAND.
Now you're playing for real. XBAND.
Even in 1994, console modems and the desire to bring online connectivity to gaming systems was nothing new. The Atari 2600 had a device called the Game Line, which allowed you to download games over the telephone, and Nintendo's Famicom had the Famicom Network System, a modem that let users of Nintendo's 8-bit system perform basic online banking, purchase and sell stocks, and even bet on horse races. As impressive as these early pre-16-bit attempts were, they were more about providing goods and services than an enhanced multiplayer gaming experience. But in 1993, two men, Steve Perlman and Steve Roscoe Roskowski, had begun quietly working on a project with the goal of bringing networked gameplay to consoles. Their concept attracted Konstantin Othmer, a talented software engineer from Apple, who would go on to become the VP of engineering for the XBAND team.
At Apple, after 5 years of being at Apple, they give you what's called a sabbatical, or they used to, and which is like a 6-week paid vacation. And go to Colorado. And so I was having friends come out and meet us at various different destinations. And one was in Breckenridge, Colorado. And my friend, actually still probably one of my best friends, a guy named Bruce Leak. And we're riding up the chairlift and we're just, dreaming and scheming about, various things. He said, "Oh, have you heard about this thing Perlman's working on?" I knew who he was. I said, "No, I haven't seen it." He says, "Oh, you got to see this thing. He's making it so you can play, these console games over the phone lines." I'm like, "No, I didn't hear about it." I was ready to jump off the chairlift. I'm like, "Okay, I've got to work on that. That just sounds too awesome."
By early 1994, Perlman and Roskowski had officially founded Catapult Entertainment, the company that would eventually release XBAND. Catapult's small but incredibly talented team were already highly successful people in key positions in some of the most high-profile companies in tech and entertainment. And even without a finished product, they could all see the potential in XBAND.
And none of them had quit their jobs yet. And they had like a very, very, very rough proof of concept working. And sort of how the system was going to, just at the lowest levels, like how do you rewrite game code in a cartridge so that you can even patch it out, to make it do anything different, like Game Genie. They had like an advanced Game Genie.
Constantine would be joined by Shannon Holland, who was also from Apple, and the two began working on XBAND almost obsessively. But they wouldn't be alone, as it wouldn't be long before top engineers and software developers from other companies started calling.
Quit my job. We get this little office. I'm like the only guy there. Another guy came over, like the best guy from Apple, Shannon Holland. Joins me, and we just start hacking like crazy day and night. I mean, literally, I did not know what day of week it was. I would work until I fell asleep, whatever time that was. And as soon as I got up, it could be any time, you just kind of wake up in the middle, just start working until I fell asleep again. And I was just doing that.
Con always slept on the couch. It was out in the the main area. And so it was kind of like Con's couch. I don't think most of us slept on it. It's like, he's a clean guy, but it wasn't like, just like kind of his bed.
It was very common to wake up in that common area and just be surrounded by pizza boxes and wrappers from fast food, because they'd stay up all night, they'd crash out on the sofa, and then you wake up the next morning and you'd do it again.
Would go home every few days, slept in the office. It was just weird. It was just like working as hard as you possibly can on this thing.
We didn't lock the door on that place, okay? The door did not get locked for like 3 months, I think, at least.
Everybody heard like we'd left to go do the startup. So all these people are calling and wanting to know what we're doing, and
I used to work at Apple with Con and Shannon. I'd heard about those guys, basically Shannon hanging out with Con a lot. He couldn't talk about it. So Perlman, Con, and those guys, they all threw a dinner. And so we start getting the spiel on what's going on. And I'm just like, I didn't need to be sold on it. If these guys were leaving, I was just like, I was following them. I mean, these guys were rock stars. And so I was like, yeah, man,
Passed by one of the video game stores, and I walked in and I was talking to this guy who was basically evangelizing XBAND. And he's like, "By the way, we're looking for testers." I started going in when they had like a new version of the modem, and I would get it and try it out at home and send feedback. I only found out about it in person. I hadn't heard about it prior to that.
And it was weird, but we need great people. So all these people started coming over.
I had a buddy at Apple named Alex Rosenberg. Basically, we made this thing that looked like a Macintosh booting on a Sega Genesis. And I was telling my friend Eric Smith at this dinner, at this pizza night. And he said, "Oh, have you heard what Constantine is up to?"
We sort of had this thing where we'd set off these cryo bombs, which is if you put CO2 in a 2-liter bottle and cap it, and man, it makes a loud explosion. And so we were doing those every once in a while just to kind of blow off steam.
I said no, I hadn't heard what he was doing. And then he told me, they've got this company Catapult, they're doing this stuff with the Sega Genesis.
Right, so Perlman goes home. So we go over to his house, it's like 1 a.m. Set this cryo bomb off, right next to his house. We take off and we're probably waiting, a quarter mile away, and we hear this boom, and it just makes this loud noise in the middle of the night, and we're laughing super hard. We drive back to the office, and the phone rings. Right when we get back to the office, phone rings.
And Eric had given me the phone number for the Catapult office, So as soon as I got back to my apartment, I called them. I think it was probably like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I expected just to leave a voicemail message saying, hey, I'm interested. I'd like to come in and see what you guys are doing. But to my surprise, Constantine answered. And Constantine thought that I was actually Steve Perlman.
And I'm like, I figured for sure it's Perlman. He's like, yeah, I thought he was going to yell at me like, dude, what the hell are you doing? Like, family, neighborhood. It was Joe Britt. He was at 3DO.
Unbeknownst to me, just a couple of hours before, they had gone over to Steve Perlman's house and set off a dry ice bomb under his bedroom window. Now, the dry ice bomb comes up over and over and over again in the history of Catapult.
That was the epic time that we had. I mean, those were the, if you will, stress release, right? We're blowing up.
And he's like, oh, hey, Con. I answered the phone. I said, Cryobomb headquarters. And he's like, oh, hey, it's Joe. Like, Joe!
But it wasn't Perlman, it was me. And when Con found out that I was calling because I was interested in being there, he said, well, what are you doing? Like, just come on over, where are you?
I said, well, why don't you come on over? We're doing some fun stuff, and I think you'd really like what we're working on.
So I just went back outside and got in my car, and I drove over there, and what I found was just incredible. It was this little office, in this office park in Cupertino. The lights are on, the front door is open, there's a stereo blaring music. Again, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Joe shows up, we start talking about what we're doing, interviewing him and all this kind of stuff. I think by 5:36, he'd accepted the position.
I started as a contractor immediately, and started working on writing some sound code for XBAND.
The marketing crew, God love them, they would come in sometimes to the offices, and I didn't realize it, but I'd be swearing all the time at the keyboard, and they were just like, do you like this company? And I'm like, yeah, this is great. We're like building the future. And they're like, oh, we're just kind of concerned because you're always swearing.
There were things like the cryo bombs and the cryo cannon and the fireworks that they were just all part of like a really bonding exercise. Everybody was with everybody basically 24 hours a day. So, these kinds of activities really helped us bond.
Catapult was able to secure investment capital from Davis Video Enterprises as well as Viacom, who purchased a 35% stake in Catapult. But money alone isn't enough to create a product. Prior to Constantine and others joining Catapult in April of 1994, XBAND had only been worked on by Roscoe and Perlman. There were still network latency issues that needed to be resolved, software to be written, and game compatibility hurdles that just had to be addressed.
One of the needs at the time was doing the communications between the box and the server. And I was just like, yeah, I'll do that. We were just kind of going around and figuring out what people could do. TCP/IP had been around for a while, but it hadn't really taken off like it has now, right? I mean, nothing was really out there yet. The internet, the web browser hadn't come around, so the internet, quote unquote, didn't exist for a lot of people, right?
Catapult would also need a few months to distribute, market, and of course, manufacture the XBAND modems. This meant that Catapult's team really only had from April to October to create a seamless online gaming experience for the Sega Genesis if they wanted their product to be ready in time for the 1994 holiday season. This tight deadline resulted in Catapult having to work around the clock, coding, designing, and finding creative solutions to shorten the length of their development.
This was my board that I used, when I was doing development. This is the ROM, and that was not reprogrammable. But then my friend Matt, he built this little board that would plug in place of the ROM, and then this has just a bunch of battery-backed RAM. So we could download code into RAM really, really quickly over and over and over again, not have to, reburn the ROM chips.
At the time, there were sort of two companies, if you will, that sort of had a buzz around Silicon Valley. One was Rocket Science Games. If you remember Rocket Science, they were doing the sort of CDs for Hollywood-style video games. Really cool, some great technology. Actually, one of the reasons we were able to go as quickly as we could, they had already built some basic tools. I went over to Bruce. I'm like, okay, we're building this thing on Segas. I know you have been too. Like, tell me about it. So we start talking, and I'm like, well, how much of the core hardware have you simulated? And he goes, oh yeah, we've simulated the graphics chip, we've done this, we've got all these different pieces. I said, well, do you have a memory manager? He's like, yeah, well, we've got a memory. I said, can I just get that stuff from you? Like, we're not competitive. Like, just give me whatever the hell you got. He's like, I can't just give you our. What are you talking about? I can't give you our stuff. I said, dude, okay, look, I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to write a memory manager tonight. And either give me one, or why the fuck am I going to sit there all night writing this memory manager? Just give me the one you got. He's like, all right. I'll give you the memory manager. So I get back, and I was like, hey, you guys, I got a memory manager. Let's, and get the floppy. And I'm like, whoa, there's a bunch of stuff on here. Whoa, wait a second. He gave me a bunch of other stuff. What is this stuff, right? And he gave me the simulator for the graphics system.
If Catapult had any fears of meeting their deadline, they sure didn't let it show. After only 2 months of work by the full team, Catapult was set to show off their new modem to the press on June 7th of 1994. At the time, Catapult's device hadn't even been named XBAND yet and was referred to as simply the Catapult modem.
We were accused of being fraudulent many times. In fact, when we launched, some people came to me and said, well, it's fraud. This is just fraud. This is not possible.
We had our booth and we're showing all this stuff off. The main thing I remember is disbelief. People coming by and just not believing that we could do what we were actually doing. But we knew we could. I mean, we had done it. It was real. There were no smoke and mirrors.
But no one would have believed it. Like that initial press was like 2 or 3 years ago. No, like 2 months ago. No, but we were too stupid to know better.
Catapult announced that they would release their modem and accompanying network in mid-November of 1994. Catapult had successfully squeezed years of development into just a few months. With a test market release for the holiday season looming just around the corner, the most important question remaining wasn't if XBAND could connect 2 consoles to each other over phone lines. It was whether or not XBAND would be able to connect with gamers.
Went up to visit Nintendo. We had to show a working demo, and that just wasn't our goal in engineering for a while. We were like just working on building the thing. It's like, oh, go get the demo working. I was like, oh crap, okay, get the demo working. And so the thing was kind of half-assed working. We bring it up there, and I'm trying to remember who the CEO was. If it was Howard Lincoln, it was one of the top executives. And we demo it to him, and the thing works flawlessly. It's just like, and he's like, holy shit, you got to be kidding! Hang on. He brings all these people in. And then I'm trying to get it working, and I can't get it working. Keeps losing, saying, and he says, look, believe me, this thing used to work. And he's like, you guys told me this was not possible. And it was like, it was a bunch of these guys are all just like, It's like, why did you tell me this? I just saw it working. I saw it working exactly what I want. You told me it wasn't possible.
Catapult had done the impossible, and now they were ready to bring their revolutionary product to the market. XBAND's launch event was, in my opinion, one of the most daring and ambitious ever in the history of video games. It was an event that both would show people what XBAND was truly capable of, as well as shut up any naysayers or doubters. Now, before we take a closer look at this 2,800-mile spanning event, to understand how impressive it really was, we first have to take a closer look at just how XBAND service worked and the XBAND cartridge itself. Although we're looking at the Super Nintendo version here, XBAND modems for both the Genesis and Super Nintendo have the same basic external design. The game you wanted to play would be plugged into the top of the XBAND modem's cartridge slot, and your XBAND would then be inserted into your console's own cartridge slot. On one side was a telephone jack for your phone cord, as well as a pass-through switch. When placed in the up position, the pass-through switch allowed you to play a game without connecting to the XBAND network. Another undocumented feature of the pass-through switch is that it would allow you to play Super Famicom games on the Super Nintendo without the need of another adapter or modification. The other side of the modem featured a slot for XBAND cards. XBAND cards were mostly used to provide rental accounts to gamers renting an XBAND from a video game store. XBAND cards were also used in Japan, but we'll touch on that a little bit more later. Signing up for XBAND service required a phone call to XBAND's 1-800 number. Each XBAND came with an insert detailing the information that would need to be provided when calling, such as credit card information and, if desired, parental limits on hours of play and spending caps. When users first logged into XBAND, the modem would dial a 1-800 number to connect to Catapult servers, which were managed by CompuServe, a company best known as being an AOL competitor.
800 numbers you can't turn off caller ID. A lot of people don't know this, right? If you know something about a crime and you don't want to be known, don't call the 800 number, okay? We would send a code up to CompuServe because they were managing our modem banks for us. And that code would say, oh, you want to be hooked up to the game servers, to the Catapult game servers. And the servers would wake up and say, okay, yeah, I got that. You know, I see you're playing NHL 95. Here's all your new emails from other players. Here's, new news like that. We had that newspaper that was going on. All that stuff would get downloaded.
Once a player selected challenge from the menu, Catapult servers matched them with an opponent. XBAND would disconnect from the server, and one of the matched players' modems would automatically dial the other directly. It sounds fairly simple, but really it was far from it. Creating the operating system and infrastructure for the service was one thing, but getting 2 players across town, or even the country, to play a game of Mortal Kombat over a 2400 baud modem plugged into their Genesis or Super Nintendo, and to do it so seamlessly that it was practically like playing with your friend in the same room, well, for many of us it seemed like magic. And while it wasn't magic, Catapult's methods behind getting the XBAND to work were more impressive than anything that could come from a magic wand.
It's like, oh, a 2400 baud modem? Like, we have faster modems now. Why aren't we using something faster? And it had to do with something called latency.
You've got these 2 systems, and all you need to do is, get the controller inputs from one or the controller inputs of the other, and vice versa. And why isn't it just like that person sitting right next to you? Like, how hard can that be? And the delay of getting 1 byte to the other side was something like 500 milliseconds, half a second. 2 modems just sitting there wired directly together.
It's not just the speed, it's not how fast the data travels, but it's the delay.
Okay, it turns out modems compress the data. And what we want, we don't care about the amount of stuff that gets over there. We care about how fast it gets over there.
And that was part of why we chose a 2400 baud modem. It was such a simple encoding of the data. We knew if we put a byte in, it would take a certain amount of time to actually get onto the phone line.
Catapult's solution was to essentially send button presses uncompressed. But that was only part of the equation.
All right, we don't have any source code. We're taking a cartridge off the shelf at Best Buy and reverse engineering it.
We're not really able to radically change the game software at each end. We can just create these little, what we call patches, that would overlay chunks of code. And so what we were really doing is we were taking the games apart and understanding where the pieces of code were that were reading the game controllers, where the pieces of code were that were doing things like generating random numbers for the gameplay. And we were creating patches to overlay those in a very surgical way. And by doing that, the game program thinks that it's got 2 or more local controllers, when in reality, one is on the other side of the country, or next door, right? Just on the other end of the phone connection.
We had these guys called the game crackers. And every game was a lot of work by a super smart guy that just sat there day and night trying to keep those 2 systems synchronized across this crazy thing we designed.
I did play Weapon Lord. It's the only game out there that has the XBAND logo branded on the box. And I thought, well, now this must be perfect. And sure enough, as a fighting game, Weapon Lord on the XBAND was perfect.
The majority of the games played on XBAND were never intended to be played via online multiplayer. Now, there are some exceptions, such as Weapon Lord, a game that was made specifically to work with XBAND by its developers, as well as Killer Instinct, which Nintendo helped Catapult in patching for XBAND.
Our challenge was to figure out how to pass all the data back and forth between the 2 consoles in 1 frame time, so that when it comes back around and reads what it thinks the controllers are, we've got updated controller information.
So we need to delay each side until we get all the input we needed to generate the next frame. So we have, side A has to send it to side B needs to send it to side A, then we can render the next frame and move. So everything was, how many frames are we delayed?
MK3 I played most of the time. When I first signed on to it, the lag was so bad it was almost unplayable. If you know the character in MK3 Sub-Zero, sometimes in the early days of that, it was so bad you could actually leave 3 ice clones on the same screen.
was a long distance call every time I tried to even connect just to get my email and stuff like that. But it was super smooth operation, even in Mortal Kombat 3, because the graphics were so advanced at that point that the game would kind of chug a little bit here and there, but that was because of the game, not because of the X-Band, and that was super cool to me. I was like, I just can't believe it moves this fluidly.
Because computers aren't smart and they don't have a very easy time recovering from problems, especially when they're not connected, these protocol stacks basically help make that so you have what's called a reliable transport. When you're playing a game, you don't have time to be like, hey, what'd you say there? Everything gets out of synchronization, all that kind of stuff. So his version of it was different than mine. Mine was more like, you log in and you get the emails from your friends. You can pick which games you're working on, all that kind of like doo-doo-doo kind of stuff. Shannon's stuff was all about the twitchy, right? It had to be really quick. It had to be really reliable.
The other games actually did mostly well. Killer Instinct was another game that I played on there. Killer Instinct, though, was really well on there. MK2 was also another game, and I thought, well, if MK3 is this bad, I figure MK2 must be terrible. No, MK2 was almost perfect.
If you're playing locally, we were basically 2 frames delayed because you got to go over the modem. We had to do a bunch of other stuff. If you're across the country, we would be 3 frames delayed. So if you played from LA to New York, it'd be 3 frames. Most people, even the really, really good players, if it's 2 frames delayed, they couldn't tell. They might go, I don't know. I couldn't swear that it was any different. If you were 3 frames delayed, they'd say, it's different. I don't know why, but it's a little different. I can't tell, but I know it's different.
Once a game patch was created, the XBAND modem used its custom ASIC chip designed by Steve Roskowski to apply the hack. This chip enabled XBAND to work similar to a Game Genie, allowing it to modify memory as needed. In fact, there were preliminary plans to add Game Genie-like cheat codes to XBAND.
We could have a real nice UI that just comes up, you put in the cartridge, like, oh, you're playing that game, what do you want? Why is that? Instead of Game Genie, like you were putting codes in or something. As I recall, we decided not to do that because it diluted our message. We are the online gaming multiplayer thing.
But XBAND was more than just a way to play games against other people. As Khan mentioned earlier, XBAND had some of Apple's best minds working on it, and they also had some friends from other companies that they could lean on for help.
We needed someone to actually compose the music for the thing. And the limitations of writing music on the Genesis and then later on the SNES, they're really substantial. And the good news was I had a really good friend from college who also worked at Apple, Johnny Turpin, who I knew was a very accomplished musician and a fantastic engineer. I set about putting in place the technical parts of the software that would run on the console, and then reached out to Johnny, and he came over, saw what we were doing. He was also really excited about it. The music that he created, I think, holds up really, really well.
The only thing it was supposed to do was play games. Like, that was the vision. You plug it in, you push the button, it finds someone else, and you play. And that was the goal for Christmas. Of course, we had a little feature creep because we were a bunch of crazy knuckleheads that were building an OS that we could just, if you look at it, it's actually funny. Each of those icons were essentially apps. And so it was kind of the first version. I mean, it's stupid to say, but it's like the first version of the iPhone, right? They were just little apps, and you could write a new app real easily. Okay, let's do a player list. Okay, let's add email.
There's nothing to do, right? All the things to do were done. Like, well, I'm not going to sit here. Hacked on it for a few days, and I got an email to send, right? And people were like, wait a minute, you can send and receive? And I was like, yeah, if we had a domain name, you'd be able to send and receive to the boxes. Somebody was like, let's get a domain name.
And a project manager looking at it would be going, what are you doing? You trying to make the fonts look good? We're shipping in Christmas, right? And you're worried about anti-alias fonts that are proportional. You want the I to be thinner than the W. You really care about that. No other game that, like, yeah, I's should be thin, W's are wide. Yeah, it's got to look good.
Joey Stockline when he was doing the graphics, right, for all the icons and everything, really. He was such a perfectionist, and he would sit with his face like, 3 inches away from the screen, like just looking at every single individual pixel.
That's probably like half the experience that people remember from the service, is that it was this like amazing soundtrack, this really cool art style, and you felt like it was like this carefully crafted thing, because it was.
It was that Apple culture of like, yeah, you could do it that way, but would you be proud of it? Is that something you'd really be proud of if you did it that way? Couldn't you do it a little bit better?
Within a few months, it would be clear that Catapult's hard work had paid off. XBAND was first released for the Sega Genesis in November of 1994, with its service launching in 5 key test markets: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Dallas, Atlanta, and New York. To make XBAND's launch truly memorable, Catapult teamed up with EA for a literal coast-to-coast competition. The event took place on November 25th, 1994, Black Friday, and featured Justin Whalen and Dean Cain from the popular TV show Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. Justin Whalen and Dean Cain took on Bobby Houston and Marcus Turner of the New York Jets in a game of Madden 95. Taking on the name of Team Kryptonite, Dean and Justin played from a Los Angeles Virgin Megastore, while the New York Jets played from a Software Etc. store in New York. For those wondering, Team Kryptonite defeated the Jets in both games they played, 41-12 and 44-18. The event garnered positive coverage for XBAND and was accompanied by a 6-week TV advertising campaign. Those who used it loved the service, but there weren't that many people purchasing the modems, and without a sizable user base, there was no product.
I had no local players for about the first year. There was nobody.
I think I was probably one of the few, if not maybe the only person in this area that had it.
You'd get an X-mail every week or every 2 weeks saying, here are the local players in your area. And I'd get that same letter, nobody. It was always going to be a long distance call.
So it was weird. We didn't know what we were, how do we position, how do we sell it? It's not selling.
The response that we got when we initially put it out there was underwhelming.
And here we are spending literally millions of dollars branding this thing. And if you look at our early ads, you can barely figure out what it is. So I'm like, okay, I'll spend less money and I'll launch a CD. They're like, well, how are you going to do it? I said, I'm going to give the modems away. They said, well, we don't have any budget. We're near broke. I said, I don't need any budget. We have inventory. I got a phone number and I had someone to man the phones, to actually woman the phones. That was my budget. One person answered the phone number. And so it was like, the total budget was like $3,000, and I'm going to launch Kansas City.
The strategy worked. Both the price for the XBAND modem and its monthly subscription service was lowered going forward. And while XBAND modems weren't given away for free again, Catapult did run several promotions, such as its $20 for a 6-pack of modems offer to build up their user base. In May of 1995, Catapult announced that the Super Nintendo version of XBAND would be released to the same test markets later that month, along with a reduced price of $29.99 for both the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions. The importance of Catapult's deal with Viacom became more apparent during this initial rollout. At the time, Viacom owned the movie and video game rental giant Blockbuster Video. Catapult's partnership with Viacom allowed XBAND to be sold in over 500 Blockbuster stores located in the test markets.
Blockbuster was way behind it. Was really behind it for a while. And the key for us was people had to try it. You have to experience it to kind of love it and want to buy it and be part of it and all that.
Went to the local Blockbuster and I'm looking around and all of a sudden I see XBAND video game modem. Like, whoa, this is good. This looks cool.
One day when it just showed up at Blockbuster Video in my little town, they had like a whole row of like 4 or 5 or 6 of them up on the shelves. And I was like, there it is. There's that thing, Dad.
On August 10th, 1995, only a few months after adding the Super Nintendo version of XBAND to the test markets, Catapult announced that XBAND would be coming to all Blockbuster stores in the United States the first week of October. That's over 4,000 Blockbuster locations. But Blockbuster wasn't the only place that you could purchase an XBAND. You could also find it in stores like Toys R Us, Electronics Boutique, KB Toys, and more.
Isolated, detached. No one should have to play video games by themselves.
Hey, Tiny. I got something for you.
Fortunately, there's this new thing called the XBAND Video Game Network. It's the world's first video game network for your Genesis or Super Nintendo, and it can automatically match you to thousands of the most cutthroat video gamers in the country. All you gotta do is stick an XBAND video game modem into your Genesis or Super Nintendo. Plug in a phone cord. And in seconds, you'll be on the network. Once you're on, you can pick your own character.
For XBAND's nationwide release, Catapult dropped the price of their hardware to just $20. The subscription service cost was also reduced to $4.95 a month for 50 connections, or $9.95 a month for unlimited local play. The connections were based per opponent, meaning that once you connected to an opponent, you could choose to play each other in rematches over and over without it counting against your 50 connections. If you weren't able to find anyone to connect to locally, or just wanted to expand your available opponents, you could opt to search for players outside of your local calling area in XBAND settings. But doing so would risk being charged high long-distance fees by your phone carrier.
My sister got a $350 phone bill that was because I was dialing from all parts of the country. So
we had like a $150 phone bill one month that my mom hit the roof.
To help with long-distance charges, Catapult offered XBAND Nationwide, a service which gave its users a discounted $3.95 per hour long-distance rate, a rate that both players would be charged on top of their regular monthly XBAND plan. Gamers who may have been on the fence about the service were able to try it out by renting an XBAND from Blockbuster, along with a prepaid number of credits on XBAND cards. At its nationwide launch, XBAND was compatible with 18 games, 10 for the Sega Genesis and 8 for the Super Nintendo. Critics, and more importantly gamers, raved about XBAND.
There was this community that just sort of emerged from the service that it wasn't actually used exactly in the way that people anticipated. And they really loved it.
It would match you up with people that were similar skills, so you didn't have to be, just the best guy on the block. You could have some fun with somebody clear across the country and not really get your butt beat too bad. It really was a terrific piece of equipment.
The fact that I could actually get a real email address was probably one of the biggest appeals for me. And then, of course, I wanted to beat people in NBA Jam.
When gamers across the country fired up their XBANDs, they were greeted to features and options that even Xbox Live wouldn't have at launch.
Each XBAND game modem supports up to 4 players per household. To be recognized on XBAND, players must create their own personal handle and select a unique player ID from over 50 different character icons. Passwords may also be used to protect a player's personal statistics and mail. Once on XBAND, players can choose to be matched to an opponent of similar skill or request a specific opponent from their players list. And before the match begins, players will be able to send a taunt to challenge each other. At any time, players can access their stats file to check their latest ranking by game title and track their progress among other competitors. XBAND also allows players to send and receive messages on Xmail, and when inside their mailbox, players can check out XBAND's online newspaper, Bandwidth, which keeps players updated on the gaming scene, upcoming XBAND tournaments, sports, and entertainment news. If desired, even parents can express themselves on XBAND by setting controls on the number of hours, times of day, and long-distance calling restrictions for their children when playing on the network.
After a game was finished, you could chat with your opponent by pressing up 3 times on the D-pad. This would bring up a screen where you could chat with each other in real time, essentially bringing instant messaging to the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Typing with a controller was cumbersome, but Catapult released XBAND keyboards for both the Genesis and Super Nintendo.
So this was actually the original prototype keyboard, and you can see there's a big notch cut out of it right here. This is missing the board now, but this was the one that I used to develop the keyboard. There originally was a board in here, and this is where I would plug in the different microcontrollers as I was testing stuff. We went to Fry's and bought these, and then just took them apart and hacked them up and turned them into the prototype Catapult keyboards. They're quite rare. You can only get them by mail order from Catapult.
Today, these keyboards are quite rare and a fairly expensive collector's item. Catapult was also smart enough to include call waiting settings that would pause the gameplay for both XBAND users when a call came in. Once you were done with the call, XBAND would reconnect both players and pick up right from where you left off. Catapult was able to push out firmware and software updates to the modems whenever they connected to the service. Additionally, there were a few minigames that could be accessed by entering special codes during XBAND's main menu. One of the games was Rattle Bassin, a Pong clone that featured the names of Catapult's designers and staff. Even though XBAND came bundled with all of these forward-thinking features, almost immediately XBAND users began to use the service in ways that its designers had never thought of.
So we could see basically everything that was going on. And the first thing someone wrote to somebody else was like, hey, do you want to join my gang, or do you want to join my team? And we're like, what the hell is that?
Everybody wanted to be their club. Everybody wanted to have their own club.
Clan? Do you want to join my clan? It was something. There was a word for it. And this became like, and we're like, I worked on this product. What the fuck are they talking? What are they talking about? Like,
how they would advertise their club, they would put the name that you could edit your name back then, and they would just put it as part of the name.
Me and my friend were going to create our own clan, and so I created, which was NHG, Nipplehead Gang. It was a silly thing.
And they were using like one of their users as like a news group for their clan.
A lot of them were very foul-mouthed.
Generally speaking, playing games on XBAND, even fighting games, worked very well. In most games, the small amount of dropped frames used to sync gameplay for both players wasn't noticeable, especially if you were playing a local opponent. Typically, long-distance games were played without any major issues, although performance would vary by location and the game being played. Some games like NBA Jam even allowed 4 players to play over XBAND. Eventually, the number of XBAND-compatible games grew to 28 titles, with the Genesis and Super Nintendo each getting 14. Noteworthy games include Mortal Kombat 1 through 3, Super Street Fighter 2, Mario Kart, and Doom on the Super Nintendo. Doom was one of the few games that featured official XBAND support straight out of the box. Doom over XBAND allowed 2 players to play a head-to-head deathmatch. The first person to get 5 frags and exit the level was the winner. There were, however, some limitations. Although the background music played, there were no sound effects during gameplay, and your opponent would be represented by one static sprite. So basically, the only way to know if you had been hit or were being shot at was to keep an eye on your health. But it was Doom deathmatches on the Super Nintendo, and it worked. Now, as great as XBAND was, it wasn't without problems. XBAND users didn't just come up with creative ways to use the service to build communities. They also came up with creative ways to cheat and harass each other.
Back then, I'd get hate mail every week saying they're going to come to my house and kill me. If you beat somebody, they're going to send you a nasty letter. You lose to somebody, they're going to send you a nasty letter.
I'm getting these messages like, angel death, you know, expletive.
People who were rivals or argued with each other or harassed each other.
I could go on and on and on about, just 30 different ways people were sort of cheating or working around or trying to win without really winning. And we'd have to detect that and give the win to the right guy.
Hey, this person was losing and they pulled their cord out. And that was the classic XBAND move was cord pulling.
People who are actually winning the game, and then they would disconnect because they saw the other guy was about to score.
But people learned this little thing. If they were about to lose, they pull the plug on their phone cord. Robbie made my win.
He disconnects and he says, oh man, it got disconnected. I was winning. Give me the win. And we had to have integrity of that. Or if there wasn't integrity in terms of who's winning and losing, all bets are off, right? So we spent an enormous amount of time fixing every one of those.
Mail bombing, which involves sending a large amount of emails to someone, was another common way to harass players.
Because your mail didn't have a lot of storage, if you just keep sending somebody letters and it gets backed up in their system, they can't send or receive any letters as long as you've got, 50 X-mails waiting for you to download.
Mail bombing. And he would just send email after email.
You can't do anything. You got to keep connecting and keep connecting. Here, and you get spam. It would just be a blank letter saying F you, and you had 20 of those.
Catapult came up with various ways of detecting cheaters and addressing concerns over who got awarded a win, but it was an ongoing battle throughout XBAND's life. Now, so far, we've only discussed these: the 16-bit US, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis modems. But Catapult and XBAND service went beyond the confines of just 16-bit consoles and even the US. A few months before XBAND was rolled out nationwide, Catapult made 2 major announcements about XBAND's expansion. First, on March 30th, 1995, Catapult announced a partnership with Intel to bring XBAND network multiplayer technology to PC games. Catapult published a list of the first wave of games that would feature XBAND PC support built in, and launched a beta of XBAND PC in February of 1996. Less than 2 months later, on May 8th, 1995, Sega Channel producer General Instrument announced that they had reached an agreement with Catapult to integrate XBAND service and features into the Sega Channel. On May 24th, 1995, Japanese company Nisho Iwai and Catapult issued a press release to tout the formation of Catapult Entertainment Japan.
And Japan was done big time. Bankers, Nisho Iwai, 7-Eleven, partners, lots of money, the whole bit. Fast forward 3 months, and they're like, nothing works. And so we had to go over there, send a team over, spent weeks and weeks and weeks making the whole thing work and getting it so we could launch. And it was the old sleep on the floor 24/7, in Tokyo.
This partnership produced a Japanese version of XBAND for the Super Famicom that launched in early 1996. Rather than billing monthly to a credit card, Japanese XBAND users purchased online playtime via XBAND smart cards from kiosks at Lawson's, a Japanese store chain. The cards cost 2,000 yen, or about $20. The Japanese XBAND launch received the full treatment of magazine advertisements, promotional posters, and TV commercials. Fast forward to a year later, the Sega Saturn modem was released in Japan in April of 1996. Sega partnered with Catapult to develop the modem hardware as well as to integrate XBAND software. The Japanese version of the Saturn modem bears a striking resemblance to XBAND's 16-bit counterparts, while the US version, named the Netlink modem, featured a revamped design.
We had done a version for the Saturn. I completely forgot about it, and we never shipped it. So there was at least a prototype of a Saturn keyboard.
The Saturn's XBAND has many of the same features as the 16-bit versions, but does boast some additional extras like direct dialing your opponent by entering in their phone number. April of 1996 also saw Catapult enter into an agreement with Tectoy, who would distribute the Genesis version of the XBAND modem in Brazil as the Meganet 2.
This guy just shows up and says, hey, knocks on our door, and it's the Tectoy guy. And so, the other executives were dealing with him and just didn't respond. Like, what the hell, Brazil? Like, we're going to launch something in Brazil. And so, but these guys are like really, really passionate about it. And they saw what we had and they're like, man, this would be great for Brazil. So I sit down with him. I'm like, all right, here's the deal. No one here wants to do this deal, but I want to help you. Here are the rules. We're going to sell you a bunch of parts. That helps us a lot. I'm going to give you all the source code. Do with it whatever the hell you want. But I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to support you. I'm not going to do anything else. It is your thing to go figure out and make whatever you want to do with it, you do with it. I said, I love you guys. I hope to never hear from you again. Hats off to those guys. We had the best time. They were awesome. They were really awesome. And they were really passionate. And I gave them everything I could.
The Meganet 2's system menus were translated to Portuguese, but other than that, it was essentially identical to the US version. So XBAND was praised by critics and customers. It had the advantage of being the first to offer social features and a refined multiplayer experience on consoles. The service had expanded internationally. Its PC counterpart was in beta testing, and a version for the next generation of consoles had made it to the market. Taking all of this into consideration, one would think that XBAND had a long, bright future ahead of it, but XBAND's final connection would be dialed sooner than anyone expected.
At least my view was we had the best engineers in the world, working 24/7 to deliver this thing, and we delivered something everybody said was impossible. And then the thing was a failure. So, we didn't sell very many of them. And, to this day, I'm still, kind of unwilling to believe that there was not a huge market for it.
In spite of all of the good press it received, talent behind it, creative marketing, and generally positive reviews, XBAND for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo never took off commercially the way Catapult needed it to, and after a couple of years on the market, Catapult was running out of money and wouldn't be able to continue alone.
we were out of money, so we're trying to figure out what to do. And Electronic Arts was interested in buying us. Electronic Arts didn't like the idea of Blockbuster because Blockbuster was renting their games, and they thought people should buy the games and not rent the games. And so that ended up creating some fairly painful political situations for us, in terms of what we were able to do with the company down the line.
In July of 1996, Catapult and another company, Empath Interactive, announced that they had signed an agreement to merge the two. The reverse triangle merger would involve Catapult filing to reorganize under Chapter 11 bankruptcy in October of 1996. They would then merge with MPCat, a company that Empath owned and created just for the merger. The merger between Catapult and MPCat would see Catapult become a wholly owned subsidiary of Empath Interactive.
Not everybody came across from Catapult to Empath, but a lot of people did. And a lot of, some of the more senior people like Roscoe and a lot of the ideas made it across as well. But over time, I think I actually came to appreciate that there were a lot of really intelligent people there as well that had a lot of the same elements that I really appreciated about the people at Catapult.
Catapult's creditors and equity holders received about $14 million in cash, securities, and notes from Empath's purchase of Catapult and its assets when the transfer was completed in November of 1996. But rather than save XBAND, the merger sealed its fate.
It was an interesting study in the difference between a startup that thinks of itself as a startup and a startup that thinks of itself as a big company. And it was a little bit more office-y, I guess, would be the clearest way to say it. But if you consider, you might consider that a downside. The upside is that they had tons of games on their service.
Empath was a company with a burgeoning multiplayer service for PCs called MPlayer that was scheduled to launch in the fall. The plan was for the new merged company to operate under the Empath Interactive name, with XBAND continuing as the console-only arm of the company and MPlayer as its PC multiplayer service.
I mean, I'm guessing a little bit here, but I think the console stuff was never that popular. It would be weird to run XBAND PC alongside Empath. So my guess was, or is that it was more sort of like a technology and talent acquisition more than anything.
So although some PC games featured the Play It on XBAND logo, XBAND PC was never made available to the general public due to Empath's acquisition of Catapult.
Things got restructured a bit when we went to Empath. I sort of left immediately. It was like the deck chairs got rearranged.
XBAND on PC was no more, but at least it seemed like XBAND on consoles would continue. Sadly, that wouldn't be the case. It wasn't long before Empath made it clear that their focus going forward was going to be on PC multiplayer, not consoles. On March 26, 1997, XBAND users logged in and downloaded a somber bandwidth news bulletin informing them that XBAND's network for the Genesis and Super Nintendo would be shut down in April. Since Sega managed the network for the Saturn modem and Netlink, Saturn users would remain unaffected. XBAND's 16-bit multiplayer network operated from November 14, 1994 to April 30, 1997, just 2 weeks shy of 2.5 years.
I was telling my friends, and they're like, what's bumming you out, man? I was like, gosh, I was like, XBAND is no more. And they're like, what kind of music does XBAND make?
I was heartbroken when it just went away. It was one of the best experiences of my life. I mean, I'll never forget it.
I think it was a new concept that people just hadn't heard of. Like if you're in the know, like people now go, holy shit, that thing's awesome. It's obvious. In 1994, there was no internet.
We were trying to figure out how to make customers understand what the product was.
Like walk into a Blockbuster and come across this thing that says XBAND, and you're like, am I renting this? What is this?
Trying to explain to someone what this thing is and what the benefit is, and it ties up the phone line, but you can play some. So I think the messaging was difficult.
This online gaming thing was so new that they couldn't make sense of it. They'd have to see it.
Parents understood what it meant to buy a cartridge for their kid and give it to them. I'm going to pay $50 or $60 for this piece of plastic. Parents had never thought about, what if I connect it to the phone line? What value, will be derived from being able to play it with, friends over the phone line?
It was somewhat expensive tying up a phone line. You couldn't do XBAND nationwide. Long distance calls were expensive. So, end of 16-bit, so we didn't have a lot of time to figure it out. Everyone starts talking about 32-bit, so now there's noise.
It's difficult to blame XBAND's demise on any one thing in particular. In a way, XBAND was both too far ahead of its time and also too late to market. The PC multiplayer market was also rapidly expanding in the mid to late 90s, and as you can imagine, there were a lot more than 28 multiplayer PC games to choose from. But XBAND's story doesn't end in 1997. As of the time of this documentary, it's been nearly 22 years since the 16-bit XBANDs were of any practical use. And even though XBAND was heavily advertised during its time, many longtime gamers aren't even aware of its existence. But that may be about to change. In 1994, XBAND inspired a group of young and talented developers to do the impossible. And now, over 2 decades later, XBAND is inspiring a new crop of young and talented developers over at Retro.live to do the impossible one more time, by making original XBAND modems work alongside all of the service's features over a modern internet connection today.
I guess I've been interested in reviving the XBAND since the day it shut down.
That whole story is as crazy as the whole Catapult thing. I mean, that these guys would revive it and get it to work.
This guy named Navikstai, he did a lot of the initial groundwork. When we started to get things to work, I would go back and look at Navikstai's stuff and be like, oh my goodness, like he was on the trail.
Usually Lunchbox or Tommy will say, like, here's a new file, put this on the device we're working with, and just, run with it. Let's see what happens.
We've got these SPAs. These are these Linksys devices that they take a phone connection and an Ethernet connection and power. If you're lucky enough to get an XBAND and this $10 to $15 device, depending on what you get it for, you can connect to the XBAND network and play games.
He sends me, he says, first of all, I want to know, are you supportive of what we're doing? Because I think the buzz had kind of gone around, probably cons and but they were stuck on something. And so I'm like, hey, look, guys. And he's like, okay, good. Okay, well, here's what we got.
I know we've been a little overbearing at times, and I feel bad for them. But at the same time, they were awesome.
One of the things that I sent to Tommy was I found the source code for the firmware that's actually in the XBAND keyboard.
And I told one of them, you're welcome to come to my house. You're welcome to stay there. And I've got a bunch of old hardware.
How willing they were to share their knowledge, their time. I mean, you probably got that with Khan. But that he wasn't the only one that did that. Everybody there was just so generous with their time.
But it's cool. It's like we're all handing stuff down, right? And it's been a pleasure to help out with this.
Retro.live's team has done a lot more work than just buying a couple of boxes. They've had to basically reverse engineer the entire XBAND service, including recreating game patches. Now they're still working through some latency issues, but just like Catapult once did, Retro.live has done the impossible. XBAND is now working over the internet, and it's my honor and privilege to show it to you. It's connecting. Or, well, I hear the modems doing their thing, rather. Okay, so it's connected to XBAND. Okay, just went black, it's dialing. All right. Opponent has been found. You know you love the CDI.
That was an ugly single. I can already tell. Right here.
It is a little better actually. Yeah, actually, it's not that bad, actually. I mean, I guess we can see how it is. Retro.live will soon be releasing documentation allowing anyone to build their own XBAND servers. Once the documentation is out, I'll provide a link to it in the description below. XBAND may not have been the commercial success that, in my opinion, it deserved to be. But if you've ever gone online to play a game of Call of Duty, Halo, Overwatch, or anything else, you owe a debt of gratitude to XBAND.
The moments of pure bliss that I had on XBAND was enough to really help me out and really make life more worthwhile. And that's why I'm still a gamer today.
And the story should be told. It's like the story is so incredible, and the team and what they put together. I don't know if you asked me for a half-hour interview. Here we are talking 3 hours later, and I'm so passionate about it. And it was such an incredible time.
I got to work with these unbelievably intelligent people, super nice people. And they just gave me opportunities to work with so many different things.
If you didn't have passion for what you were doing, nobody even had to say anything. You just kind of left. You couldn't hack it.
I left my job, joined Catapult full-time, and never looked back. I mean, it was one of the craziest and most fun adventures I've ever had in my life. And I'm really proud that that's part of my history, and so I love talking about it.
XBAND's legacy can still be seen today in services like Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network. Whether it's skill-based matchmaking, messaging, gamer profiles, or something else, nearly every feature offered by modern multiplayer services was perfected by XBAND all the way back in 1994. XBAND and its ideas, in a sense, never really died. It just took a while for everyone else to catch up.